Hello, my name's Duncan White. I'm the group editor of the International Fire and Safety Journal, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Ryan Fogelman from Fire Rover. Ryan is the Vice President of Fire Protection Services at Fire Rover and somebody who I've been proud to call a friend for a number of years now. Ryan, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Duncan. It's actually morning for me, afternoon for you, so perfect timing.
Exactly. We're covering both sides, both time zones. Ryan, you and I met at FDIC a few years ago, back when you were just kicking off with Fire Rover. I remember you telling me that there were a lot of firefighters in the first 2 hours of you getting to FDIC that were concerned that you were doing them out of a job. Tell us that story, my friend.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was actually working FDIC by myself and, working a booth by yourself. It was I for the first 2 hours, I had people constantly coming up to me, the fire professionals, and they were all like, "You're putting us out of a job. You're putting us out of a job." And literally, like, I didn't know whether they were kidding or not. I kind of thought they were, but, you never know. And so I asked one of the captains, he was actually a Long Island, resident. And, I remember saying to him, I'm like, "Hey, am I putting you guys out of a job?" And he basically really quickly and, kind of laid it out on the line and said, "Just so you know, if you're protecting waste and recycling facilities, we've had a couple guys hurt. It's the fires we don't want to do." They ended up taking me out to dinner. And, I tried to pay. They wouldn't allow me to pay. And they actually gave me a challenge coin and said, "Keep up the work and, keep doing what you're doing." And so, it was definitely felt good to understand that, number one, we weren't taking anyone out of a job, and number two, we were basically providing them a service that stopped them and allowed them to take a defensive approach to fighting these fires.
Totally agree. Having during my career attended a number of fairly high profile incidents in scrap yards, a number which also included acetylene. It is not something that you want to be doing, and by introducing or having the ability to introduce a technology that will detect the fire at the early stages and also then put in place mitigation measures to keep that fire under control until the fire department arrives is certainly something that should be encouraged. Back in those early days, my friend, I still remember that you gave me a very, very nice gift of a back scratcher with the Fire Rover logo. Still sits and takes pride of place in my office, and I think that was probably one of the most innovative giveaways that I've ever come back from a show with. But yeah, great news. And going back to how it all started. So, how did Ryan Fogelman, a friend to an entrepreneur and friends to inventors, come to be involved with Fire Rover?
Well, yeah, it was pretty interesting. So, I had spent most of my career helping inventors really not be taken advantage of by investors, right? And, I think there's really a major difference between the word inventor and then an entrepreneur, right? The inventor needs to invent and then, really keep inventing, right? Keep focusing on innovation. The entrepreneur really takes it to market and, gets it off the first level from an awareness perspective. And, obviously there's so many things that need to be done on, from a marketing, a sales perspective, trying to figure out if there's a product, what the product does. So, it was funny. I was working on a couple other projects, and Brad Gladstone, I'd known him since high school. And he literally called me up and he goes, "Fogelman, I hear you work on innovative stuff." And he actually didn't say stuff. He said shit. But he, he's like, "Get up here." And I'm like, "Okay." And so I went to a scrap metal facility in the middle of Detroit. And, I walk in the back, and that was our first, that was the first place we built the first one. And, he had brought in Pete Mary, who was, who's really an engineer and a kind of a carpenter by trade. So he sort of did a little bit of everything. And then Jeremy Dusing, who was head of the technology piece of it. And the three of them together came up with the Fire Rover system. And, I came up, and obviously the first time I saw this big, huge red box spray, I was just enthralled by it, right? So, and it's funny, I mean, it was a big red box for a reason, but Brad, he passed away a couple years back, but, he was a larger than life personality. And so for him, like the big red box, I mean, a lot of people like called him Ringling, right? Because he was always in the center of all the, the attention and stuff. So, that back scratcher, that was his thing. He's like, he was always like, I want to give people something that they're going to use and remember forever. So, I mean, I'm sure he's looking down and happy that you're still scratching with that thing. So I appreciate it.
No, he sounds like a great man with great ideas, and he certainly hit the money with the back scratcher, because it's there and it will remain there. And I think that initial meeting, I could see the true value of what Fire Rover was bringing to the industry, not only from a stakeholders perspective, but also from a first responders perspective, that it was only going to make things safer. It was only going to protect property better, and at the end of the day, reduce insurance premiums, etc. But in the period that you guys have been going, I've recently enjoyed reading the 6th annual report that you guys have put out about waste and recycling fires. And I would encourage listeners to take the opportunity to have a look at that link at some point after this, and we will provide the necessary links with it so you can see. But you've had some pretty impressive success in the last or in 2022 in relation to reading there that activation nearly 3,000 times, summoning the fire department close to 150 times. Give me some more details on that, because what I'm reading, you've got justification to be rightly proud about the big red boxes.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting, right? I mean, I always tell people that overnight successes are created over decades, right? And like, the reality is that, in the beginning, I mean, we didn't know if the product was going to work or how it was going to work or what occupancy it was going to work in, right? I mean, originally when I first started, I was going after transformer fires, which I really believe, I mean, it's the Fire Rover is a great solution for it. But I mean, the reality is that waste and recycling, we were in 2015, and when I got involved in 2015, they were having some fires, right? And so, the idea for the annual report kind of came through. I was getting all these Google alerts, and and basically I was just putting MRF plus fire, or waste management plus fire. And again, the only place that I could find any data was in Europe, right? UK, the environmental agency, and like the fire, like the fire industry, they would actually put out what the real fires were. So, in the US, we didn't have anyone reporting it. So, I was just looking at all these reported fires. And then it was funny because in about February of 16, which was about 6 months after I started doing it, I was like, oh my God, like I need to start like putting this together just for my own benefit, right? And then 6 months later, I had sort of the beginning of that annual report, which we started to bring out, not knowing what the real hazards were, but just kind of hearing anecdotally about lithium-ion batteries. And, I was really trying to learn the business at the time. So I think there was a couple things that happened. One, there was no data out there at all. So really, we didn't really know if the solution was going to work. Second, we didn't know what problem that solution, if it was going to work, was it going to solve? And, we started going to Waste Expo and all these places. And I remember my first, I was at a paper and plastics recycling show in Chicago, and I met a guy named Brent Shows, who is now with GFL. He was with Waste Management, and he was with Advanced Disposal at the time. And I remember him saying to me, I showed him our system, and he goes, I love it. Why do I need it? And I was like, well, because you have fires. And he was like, well, do I? And I'm like, yeah, it's public knowledge. You're a public company. You had 4 fires, right, in the last year that caused like 3% hit to your revenue. And he was like, well, do my competitors? And again, at that point, really what he was trying to say was, am I a bad operator? Or are we a bad operator with fires, or are we a good operator with fires, right? And so, that was really the hit. And so fast forward to today, and, we have these numbers finally in 2022, we have over 400 facilities, but in 2022, I think we had like 300 to 350. And, I really wanted to start putting out data. And again, if you can imagine from a definition perspective, when you're building a business, right? Like the definition of what is a dispatch, the definition of what is a fire. So like the reality and what makes our system different than any other system is that we actually look at all the straws of hay in a haystack to find that needle, where most systems you have to dumb down. AI system, sprinkler system, you have to dumb down that system. So I'm looking for 220 degrees or less or more, depending on what the occupancy is. I'm looking for smoke versus steam analytics. I'm looking for a flash. And so we get triggered all the time. So of that 3,000 that you saw where we actually saw real fires, which is like a hotspot or a fire, which again, there's probably more because of the ASR piles that we see in scrap. But the reality is that, our operators are highly trained. They've looked at hundreds of thousands to get to those 3,000 where there's an actual event. Now, of those events, again, you can have a loader pull out the fire. So a lot of times we're not even charging. It might be taken care of before you even get to it. Then you get to how many times did we actually charge the system? And that's about 10% of those, where by charging the system, we mean turning the water on, right? So like inside our boxes, it's a nitrogen powered. So we pressurize the container. When we're doing a continuous flow solution, we're literally just turning the water on. Like a dry system becomes like it gets right to the nozzle. So we're ready to spray the minute that we can. And then, the actual sprays was about 137 times. And, it's crazy because as we put all these out, like we've never had a catastrophic loss that started in an area that we protect. And again, I say that because, there are times like we had one catastrophic loss last year, and it was a fire that we put out in our area, but it got into the roof. And then the fire department came 40 minutes later, and then they went to go put water on the roof, and they ended up having they went to the water. The water had been shut down by the utilities, so they literally had no water. So you lose an entire building because of it. So the reality is that like our system worked in that situation, and it has worked, knock on wood, for all these times, right? So, just in June alone, when we were at NFPA this year, you and I, we had one day where we had 6 fires that we put out, right? So that's like in one day in June. So, it's we're now responding to 450 events. And I mean, we might have between, 10 to 20 of these, more on the 20 to 25 range as we continue to grow this occupancy.
Yeah, I was just reading the one of the latest articles you put out about titled "Holy Smoke." I think was a very interesting article. Well, one of the facts I picked up from that was as you say, the 450 instance in June this year, but also from the statistics from the period 2018 2021, where you're looking at the averages of 32 injuries and 2 deaths over that period. But what really stood out was that on the whole, those injuries and deaths were fire professionals. They were the people that were coming to put the fire out. And this is where I think that 5 years down the line, we should be, if we could pull those firefighters back in that originally said that you were going to be putting them out of a job, I think that hopefully they would now see the benefits of it. But still, even now, 5 years down the line, we're still seeing these deaths and injuries. So comments from you on that, my friend?
Well, and I think there's a lot of focus that I've seen. So in 2018, we saw the spike of lithium-ion batteries hit the really hit the global stage, right? I mean, in Japan, the Japanese Packaging Association came out. They had 6 times the amount of fires in 18 over 17. Again, attributed to lithium-ion batteries. And then, Insurance Office of America came out with data which basically like justified my numbers with actual claims data. Because, in the beginning, I was always looked at like, why are you putting out an annual report? Why are you telling everybody about our problems as waste and recycling industry? And really, I mean, the reality is that the insurance companies knew about the problems, whether it was in the media or not, didn't make a difference, right? And what I was trying to do was actually help people. And so, like the article that you're referring to is, should we allow bad operators to continue to operate? And again, I'm not coming out against waste and recycling operators. Actually, they're the victims here, right? And everyone like looks at me like I'm crazy because, in reality, everybody looks at that waste and recycling operator, and all the public sees is smell and noise and vibration and all these bad things that they see. But the reality is that if you really think and you take recycling down to brass tacks, right? Not putting a pound of something inside a landfill and actually reusing it, like the scrap metal facilities and the C&D, the construction and demolition facilities, keep more tonnage out of these, out of the landfill, as well as the MRFs and transfer stations. And everyone's focused on this education piece. And the reality is that from an education perspective, you're not going to educate your way out of this, right? And that's really where, like, I'm not saying education isn't one of the three things that we should focus on. And I always say, like, it's education, it's technology like the Fire Rover system, right? And other systems out there. And then it's operational best practices. But my issue with when I talk about bad operators, right? My feeling is this, is that if you have 400 reported fires that we saw in the US and Canada, and none of those were actually any of ours that we're protecting except one, and that one had, there were circumstances. So at the end of the day, we mitigate your risk, but we're not mitigating it to zero. That's why you still need insurance companies, right? So the reality is that we have 400 facilities. None of our facilities have had catastrophic losses. Frankly, none of our facilities have had like any damage over like 20 grand, and that happened once or twice in the last 8 years. So the reality is that if our system is working as well as it is, then the reality is that just like you wouldn't drive a car now without seatbelts, you shouldn't run a waste and recycling facility without the Fire Rover system, because we're the only like closest thing you have to a guarantee that you're not going to burn this facility down and have all these issues, right? The firefighters who are fighting the fires, a lot of the injuries are heat issues, right? Where they're fighting a fire in Arizona at 105 degrees, and they're literally taking turns every 2 hours, getting off, and they go for heat exhaustion, and like obviously there's a lot more serious injuries as well. But the reality is that like the operators need to purchase these systems. Well, there's an expense to it. So basically my feeling is that this is when, like, and I'm a pure capitalist, but this is when I think government intervention needs to come in and say, okay, either we're going to fund this, they just, like, the Biden administration just put out $590 billion, right? $590 billion. I could, like, for recycling but the issue, you have like these companies that are spending 50 to 90 million building a MRF, a gorgeous MRF, and then they're burning down. Well, unfortunately, like if you have our system, it might cost, 150 grand to, let's just say, $1 million. But the reality is then you keep that facility going. So somehow the manufacturer should pay for us to put our systems in, right? And the waste and recycling operators should be able to raise their pricing to cover these things, right? The same way that GM or GM and Ford and Tesla, they pay for like seatbelts, right? It's part of the system. So again, this is where it's like, yes, there's no reason that those firefighters should be fighting a fire. And this is where I get a little bit, like my biggest pet peeve is that there are companies and individual independents out there that have decided that the way that they will fight their fires is by having the local fire department come and fight it. Which again, that's their first line of defense, right? Even if they have a sprinkler system, like that's their first line of defense. There's fire water that is literally every single thing that's used, and all these materials are now leachate into something, right? And like there's all these different things that can go wrong. So stop the fire, and if we have it in our ability to stop it, then why shouldn't we go figure out a way to do that for everybody? And granted, am I an interested party being at Fire Rover, believing it? Yes, but we are the only ones in the world doing it. We have a patent on it, and then we're also in all these other countries doing it as well. So it's like at some point, like everyone has bought a Tesla. Why not just have a Fire Rover, right? And and basically protect themselves.
Yeah, I agree, and it's we know of a problem. We've got a solution for that problem. So why aren't we actively dealing with it in that way. You talked about the Fire Rover being used in a number of countries. That was what I was going to be coming on to next. I know that you're working in Europe, you're here in the UK, USA, Australia. So it's not just the US that have seen the importance of Fire Rover. You've managed to get your message out to all those countries, and so that must be really humbling for you guys to know that the big red boxes are not just in the US.
100%. And honestly, like I think there's a couple things. I mean, people don't understand. Like we're not in the waste and recycling industry, right? We're in the fire industry, and and that's where, if you look at it from a fire equipment and fire protection perspective, there's a lot of occupancies outside of waste and recycling where the Fire Rover fits, right? Anytime you have a high hazard and inherent risk in your business, right? Outdoors, because we are the only outdoor sprinkler system that is of its kind in the world, right? And then we do indoors, obviously, as well. But it's more manufacturing. Anytime you have big line of sight, large ceilings, and big, basically box buildings, like we're the perfect type of solution for it. I was at ISRI and, scrap metal, like the reason we're in Australia is there was a scrap metal company and like they wanted our system. And, it's funny because in the beginning we're a startup, we're 4 years in. Well, I finally got them their first 3 units. So now like that's in, and like, so we have over 10 units in Australia that'll be either in or in, but by the end of the year, we should have about 15 units in and installed. In France, I was brought in by an insurance company who basically, really was like, if they don't put your system in, I'm done protecting. It was a lot of plastic recyclers. And then the UK has been a little bit more challenging. I mean, the reality is that, it's, I get all these different things. Like we don't have the money to spend on it or other things. And then you also have insurers that are global, right? So, it's a little different, but I mean, I believe that, I honestly, US, Canada, I mean, I believe France will be a pretty big market. Australia, of course, it's going to be big just because of the amount of fires that they have and the amount of space that they have and like the lack of water in a lot of their facilities. UK's, the jury's out. Like we will see if we can integrate in, but again, when all I know is that when I see all these alerts in the US, the UK has literally catastrophic fires. I mean, all the time. So, I know in the US, I believe it's about 2 to 3 catastrophic fires per month. That's about 36 a year. And again, the catastrophic's your issue, right? If you have $10,000 worth of damage, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, catastrophic is when it goes down and then you now don't have that processing equipment, recycling, or, dealing with waste. So, it's definitely been humbling for sure. I do think there's a couple more countries that we'll be going to, but really what we look for in those is really, really good partners that we can trust, that we understand have been around for a while and can not only, which a lot of people don't understand, our system is not equipment. It's a solution, right? We stand shoulder to shoulder with our customers and fight their hazards with and for them. And again, really, we're in lieu of the fire professionals, because really the idea is we focus on those 10 minutes when a breakdown occurs and a firefighter shows up, and making sure that there's nothing that's going to go wrong during that time, that we can't, like, anything we can control is good, because you can't control, I mean, fire, right? There's nothing that you can control in that triangle, right? So you do your best to try to, but every single situation is a little different, little unique, and we learn something every single day.
Yes, exactly. And that the issue of the number of recycling fires and also the catastrophic ones is on the increase, and you're regularly seeing that the fires, historically, waste and recycling has been in industrial areas close to railway lines, in arches underneath railway lines. And when one of these facilities catches fire, you're not only seeing disruption to their business, but also disruption to the lives of thousands and thousands of people that can't commute to work, that have to evacuate their homes. So the knock-on effect is massive, and anything that we can do to have an impact on that is should be explored with the technology such as Fire Rover. Um, I want to just touch now on the hot potato that you, like we said, we saw the spike in 2008. Lithium ion is here to stay. It's here to make the news every day of the week. So where do we go from here in relation to dealing with lithium ion fires in recycling and also day-to-day life?
Well, so I think a couple things. I mean, like really 2018 was the year that we saw that like a major high level of end of life, and again, when we're talking about batteries, we're talking about personal storage and personal electronics, right? Because the reality is that, cars and, EVs in theory, they should be, the reason lead acid batteries have such a closed loop supply chain is because you have a lot more control around that supply chain than you do around personal electronics and personal storage. And, the issue with personal electronics and personal storage is just the pure number of them, right? I mean, it's anything that you plug in basically has the ability to have this issue, right? So and again, it's funny because you start to see, like, I know vapes are a huge thing. So I did an article a couple months ago about vapes, and there's this thing like that when kids smoke, or like they're smoking cigarettes, and when I say kids, I'm 48, so I'm talking about 18, 20-year-olds, and basically they're quitting vaping, and they're taking all of their vapes and putting them underwater and putting soap on them and then throwing them in the trash bin because they don't understand that there's a lithium-ion battery in every one of these things. Right, because they're really just trying to quit vaping, and they're not understanding, the results of what they're doing. So, again, I think there's like the other thing that I just saw. There was there's a lot of these like videos that come in, marketing videos that come in, especially by the pharmaceutical companies, and those they're charged by batteries, right? And those batteries, there was one that I put on my LinkedIn account or my fire safety report where one of my customers took a rock, hit it, and this thing literally just went up like you've never seen. So, I think the reality is that the waste and recycling industry in the US and Canada, all the operators have put in best practices. I mean, like, if you look at where the waste and recycling industry was in 15 versus today, like, they are like, in the old days, it used to be like, hey, your insurance company would give you an audit sheet and you'd be like, hey, do you have a fire, disaster recovery plan? Or do you have a fire, a fire response plan or disaster response plan? It would be like, check, check, check. And if you really try to train on it or really do an audit, it really didn't go very deep. Nowadays, completely different, right? From an operational best practices, you're seeing, most of the waste and recycling operators out there, especially in the US and Canada. I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but, they are really, really safety conscious, and like they all bring in experts and they do everything they can. And obviously, they've been investing in systems like ours as well. But, the real question is like, why do we still see more fires? And the reason we're seeing that is because in the beginning, you had traditional fire hazards, right? And that was briquettes, like people would have fireworks, you have all these things. And like, it's interesting, we see a summertime spike in fires, but that's not caused by lithium ion batteries, right? Like that's caused by summertime spike. It's caused by briquettes, pool chemicals, all these other things. Now, again, add lithium ion batteries, which are about 50% of the fires, right? Maybe 60%, depending on where you look at the surveys. But like the reality is that as those continue to grow and continue to get more and more prevalent in the waste stream, you're literally seeing more fires. And again, even with us protecting, basically, I think now we're protecting about 5% of the market. So the reality is like, I look at this from a purely economical perspective, right? If you look at it from an economics perspective, is that like the waste and recycling operators are dealing with the very end of this problem, right? And again, batteries, I fight with people a lot on this. And again, when I say fight, I have a law degree. So I mean, have an argument about it or, go back and forth about, who thinks that, like, why they think things are correct and not. And I mean, I appreciate everybody's opinion, but like a lot of people will say that waste and recycling operators, like, they're basically saying, they're basically saying that lithium ion batteries are are not safe from manufacturing. And I will argue with that. I would say that lithium-ion batteries are actually extremely safe. You have about 1 in a million is what I've heard, but I mean, there's different numbers of how many will just have an issue because they were manufactured incorrectly. So take that through to the waste and recycling operators. When you treat it poorly, when you subject it to heat, when you subject it to, overpowering, when you subject it to cold, all these things. And then when you subject it to a loader, right? Like a half ton or ton loader. And we're not gentle on our trash, as we shouldn't be. So the reality is that we're having more and more of these fires. Well, the manufacturers are only giving the public what we're demanding, right? You and I want earbuds and we want all these things, right? We want more power everywhere, and they're giving us exactly what we want. Manufacturers aren't bad people, right? But the reality is that they're making money and they're the deep pockets here, right? Because at the end of the day, unless the waste and recycling operators can get it from the actual public, somehow the public's paying for this. So you're better off having the government go to the manufacturers and try to tax or somehow get money that gets distributed to the waste and recycling operators. Again, purely economical. I'm not saying anyone's done anything wrong. I don't think anyone's done anything deliberately wrong. I think this is just a happenstance of something that has happened, right? And again, you have a lot of people who are focusing on like EPR and better packaging. But the issue is that even when they're developing better packaging, you have issues. And again, I'll give the example of the scooter, right? In the old days, you would have a Lime scooter that had a battery pack that was inside, and they would have to throw away that Lime scooter, right, when it was end of life. Well, now they're using these battery packs that have like 14 to 18 cells in them, and those are being placed in. Well, the problem with that is, so now you have this little battery pack that we're seeing on the front lines that are causing major issues because those things are getting thrown away. And, just like a propane tank you can catch before it goes into the waste stream, and a scooter you can catch before it goes in the waste stream, you cannot catch a small battery pack, right? Small being about like, 1 foot by like 3 foot by, 1 foot by about 3 inches by 3 inches. So, a lot of times, even when they're trying to do the right things by not wasting, they're actually causing more issues in the back end because, no one truly understands when you do one thing, you basically push 10 other holes.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's easy to place the blame on the inanimate object that is the battery itself, but it's that whole sequence of things that normally come together to cause the issue. Ryan, it seems to me that Fire Rover is well proven in waste and recycling. So, is there any other industry sectors that Fire Rover could play a part?
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, that's a great question, Duncan. It's funny because the article that we did with you, the new kid on the block. I mean, I know a lot of people laughed and were talking about it, referring to me, and I'm like trying to explain that, in fire industry, especially in the beginning, right? When I met you at FDIC, everyone would say it would take you literally decades to ever prove that a product would work and actually make it inside the fire protection industry. And, so again, we've been so fortunate to cut our teeth in waste and recycling, but we are doing a ton of these continuous flow solutions for electronic recycling. We're doing refineries, chemical facilities. I mean, we have one that we're actually putting in with 106 cameras, 56 nozzles, where we're replacing Fire Rover in lieu of a sprinkler system. So we become that primary, and we have a ton of variances, but we are working on FM certification for our system, for our continuous flow solution. And again, continuous flow just means we don't use the boxes, but basically we're basically the skin that layers on top of it, the nozzles, cameras, and the brains. So, this is, it's pretty exciting time. One of the things that I'm pretty excited for is 409 was just, you're allowed to actually use a safe spill floor and a standard sprinkler system. So, our system, we believe, can replace that standard sprinkler system for hangars. And we're about to do our first pilot on that as well. So, there's a lot of stuff coming down the pike. I mean, we can handle any, business with an inherent risk of fire, whether outdoors or indoors. So I think it's an exciting time. And, now that we've gotten through the pilot and proving stage, I think it's, we'll be able to take it to the next level from a fire protection perspective.
Ryan, we've covered some ground today, my friend. We've really looked at how Fire Rover came about, how it is really making its mark on how to keep recycling facilities safe. I'm delighted that we've actually got some in the UK, and hopefully one day I will get somewhere to see it in operation, albeit in its standby mode. We've given a lot of food for thought, and I would say to listeners that please go to firerover.com. There is so much information there. Please hook up with Ryan on LinkedIn. I'm regularly seeing so much interesting stuff being developed by Fire Rover, and information coming out from Ryan that it's well worth taking the time to look at that. I'm Duncan White, and today I've had the pleasure of speaking to Ryan Fogelman, Vice President, Fire Protection Services at Fire Rover. Ryan, thank you very much, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Duncan.